2020, man. 2020. So, Paul Sperry, former DC bureau chief for Investors Business Daily, Hoover Institution Media Fellow, author of several books, including bestseller Infiltration. Infiltration. Paul Sperry is reporting, of course, like all other great reporters report on Twitter. That's true, by the way. I organize my news around Twitter. Many of the people who have all of these magazines, like the New York Times, Washington Post, etc., post on Twitter. ABC News and whatnot give snapshots of their stuff. All of that stuff gets on Twitter. And so for me, I get to kind of swim in the Twitter stuff until figure out, where my head is going. There's some feeds that you have to go beyond Twitter for, like Business Insider and some of those things. But even those things end up appearing on Twitter. So I organize it. So when I say that, I am being truthful. But Paul Sperry is reporting that Joe Biden, the one who is running for president of the United States, the one that is head of Donald Trump at this point in spades, is the subject of a active federal criminal investigation into his role in counterintelligence investigation directed at Donald Trump campaign during the 2016 election, including former vice president's activities in the Ukraine. Ukrainian witnesses are cooperating. Now, we are going to get Lee Stranahan to give a rundown on the Ukraine stuff because it was so long ago that I would imagine everybody's head is like, what? But in a nutshell, this is the tweet. Now, I've been looking for additional information on this, and I've not been able to find additional information on this. So at this point, there's no way to validate whether this is flat fact true or not. If it is true, and if I can guess, what it may pertain to is John Durham's investigation. Now, if you remember, John Durham is investigating the origins of Russiagate and whether or not anything nefarious was going on in the way that it was basically aimed, weaponized, and tried to take down the president in a soft coup. Trump didn't necessarily do himself any favors. By the same token, it was appalling. I mean, from any notion of a government, the level to which they delegitimize that win was profound. And the way the public absorbed it was terrifying. The wild part about this is when you get down to the nub of it, Democrats hated Trump. And you had a large number of people who also hated Trump. And all of these guys had a certain degree of incentive in investing themselves into the Russiagate stuff. The media didn't like Trump attacking them. That's one point. But hated Trump. He was irritant to their system. Oh, he's not polished. He's not like Obama. He's not like these other robots that are up there. He's wildly, he says things that gets under our nerves and frazzles us. The media was against him. Democratic Party, clearly against him. So when they screamed Russiagate, the media jumped in. And on top of that, there's a fiscal incentive in having this kind of Tom Clancy-esque president working with the Russians and all of this other nonsense. But you have to ask, where did that start? Why did that start? How did they get that so monstrously wrong? And why did it all seem like it was aimed at Trump? Even leaks and whatnot, it all comes out against Trump. And so, you look back at this and say, how did it start? Well, that's John Durham's job. He's straight-laced, respected, and now he's looking at a criminal investigation. So it's very possible that he's looking at John Brennan or a Joe Biden or a Barack Obama, meaning he's looking into the case. And just by virtue of looking into the case, he's looking at various people who are involved in that case. Joe Biden was vice president at the time. And as such, Joe Biden, from his standpoint, could credibly be involved in the case against Trump. Now, that doesn't mean that he's going to get Joe Biden for anything. It just means he's in pursuit of the investigation looking at Joe Biden. That's what I'm guessing this means. But I can't find any other additional information about it, so we don't necessarily know. The headline, I would have added caveats in that, but the problem is they only allow so many characters, so that's the way I wrote it. Of course, the moment that you click on the video, you get the disclaimer in regards to what is taking place and the information that you have on it. The secondary part of the Ukraine is fascinating. Let's say it this way, and I'll try to explain it in the way I understand it. I'm just reading it again. Joe Biden is the subject of an active federal criminal investigation into his role in a counterintelligence investigation and directed at Donald Trump's campaign during the 2016 election. Okay, so I guess that means spying. Spying in the campaign. Looking into it, the basically, you had people who were using this as a political weapon of sorts. I mean, think of the Carter Page stuff, where basically you spy on this kid, and this gives you an ability to peek into the campaign. Peek. What are they doing? Peek. So it's possible they're looking from that standpoint, like, why were you spying on this man's campaign? And again, in relation to all of the Trump and Russia stuff. So John Durham may be looking at all of this. But again, we don't know. We don't know. The other part to this is Ukraine. You had DNC operatives, Alexandra Chupa, who was pushing the Ukrainian embassy here in the United States to get the Ukrainian president to implicate and bring up Manafort. Now, the goal and the reason for this had to do with trying to get Manafort and trying to get information, meaning trying to get a congressional inquiry into Manafort as a way of hurting Trump. Just kind of, hey, this guy's associated with criminals, or get this guy out of Trump's campaign by getting this guy basically arrested. It's fascinating, coincidental, I suppose, that information came from the Ukraine attacking Manafort. And in bringing that information from the Ukraine to attack Manafort, Manafort ends up getting arrested. Manafort gets arrested for nothing to do with Trump, his campaign. And what's more interesting is when you look at it, Manafort was trying to get the Ukraine to be closer to Europe, not Russia. And yet, he gets arrested, and this goes under the headline of Trump and Russia. The question becomes, the DNC operative that was trying to get the Ukraine, it looks like you're trying to get another government to give you information to attack somebody in this country that is of another campaign, and to do so in a bluntly partisan way. That's what it looks like, because that's kind of what it is. Now, Joe Biden was viceroy of the Ukraine, and as such, holding them on a lifeline, literally. Because keep in mind, at this point, the Ukraine had split. We had basically fomented a coup in that country based on some of the trade policies or the deals that we wanted to make with the Ukrainian government. But beyond that point, a split was created in Ukraine. They were living on a lifeline. They were begging the international community for weapons and help, if you remember. And the United States basically had them in the palm of their hands. We were using them as proxies in that country to basically, in some level, extend NATO, but definitely not under those conditions, because NATO didn't necessarily want to get involved into a war. But Ukraine was a staging ground. that country has all sorts of hooks with the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party was in office when all that stuff was taking place. And it's just so happened that information did Trump. So it's possible that John Durham is also looking into that. Meaning, why was that information released? Why was that information hitting Trump? And was there interference in regards to the way the Ukraine was interacting with us? And why was that interference there? Those are questions. And, the news acts as if, oh, this isn't real. Nonsense. They tried to clean that stuff up after the fact. But I don't believe for a moment that this is not necessarily real. Why wouldn't they do that? It's politics. I mean, think about some of your other past leaders where you had, Nixon working behind the scenes with the Vietnamese government. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember that correctly, you had Reagan with the the Iranian hostages. Jimmy Carter was in office the entire time at that point. Reagan gets in office and all of a sudden the hostages are released. Like, you do have these back channel things that take place in American history. But in this very specific case, if you think Manafort is dirty, maybe you have dirt on Manafort, maybe you know Manafort is dirty. These guys work in the same circles, this kind of swamp. And you say, hey, knock that guy off. Get data, get dirt. We want information. And Ukraine, passive, gives it up. And that information is used to hit Manafort. You then turn around and say, look at this guy, he's dirty. And he's associated with Trump. You may even think to yourself, Manafort may be an asset to Trump that we can eliminate off the game board. Whatever you want to say that is, you, as a Democratic Party, who has a brain center, and those brain centers work just like the Republican Party when they're trying to game in politics. And in this kind of soft, finesse way, you chip away at his campaign. Look, I don't think that's far-fetched. And because I don't think that's far-fetched, yes, it deserves investigation. And by the way, less far-fetched than this Trump, Russia, Tom Clancy, Vladimir Putin telling Trump what to do and that nonsense. There's one other point. It's one thing to accuse Donald Trump and Russia, or accuse Russia of toppling democracy, of destroying and undermining democracy itself. Voting for Joe Biden is undermining democracy because you're not voting for him because he's doing aspirational politics in regards to giving you stuff that you need in regards to the pandemic or the number of people who are out of jobs or the number of people being evicted. No, that's not why you're voting for him. You're voting for him out of cowardice. And cowardice breeds zero ability to influence the political space. Cowardice is submission. And it's submission in a moment where you should not have submitted. You're voting for him because you're terrified. You're voting for him because you're terrified. And that is an inversion of democracy. That is not a representative government. That's something else. Instead of bringing up the Republicans, voter ID laws, instead of bringing up the notion that these guys are scrubbing the voter rolls of people of color using the last names as a way of doing so, and that those things had a larger influence on the race than any Facebook, Twitter ad. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to point to the devices within the context of the country, the 7-hour lines where you have people that have to work, that have to literally go to work and yet try to find ways to vote. And who does this hurt the most? The underclass. The class that is the one that needs to be involved in the political system the most. But no, they have to stand in 10, 5-hour lines, 6-hour lines, 7-hour lines, monstrous lines in communities of color because they don't want everybody to vote. And think about what that means. Greatest democracy on the planet that put up roadblocks, one after the next, in order to stop people from voting. And both parties do it. in the primaries. Democrats would do it against Sanders. Hundreds of thousands of people kicked off the rolls, polling locations shut down. They acted just like Republicans when the situation demanded. Greatest democracy on the planet. Indispensable nation. We don't know what this is. It looks like, my guess is John Durham. My guess is what they're talking about is the spying into the Trump campaign. And my other guess is the information that came from the Ukraine going after Manafort, and whether or not Joe Biden's viceroy position had anything to do with it, or for that matter, the relationship between the United States and the Ukraine under a Democratic administration, and whether the fact that that Democratic administration used used it, meaning something for government that was designed for government, meaning the relationship between these two countries, in an electoral fashion to injure a political opponent. Look, I don't know all of this stuff from the standpoint of what these guys are, what Paul Sperry is referring to, but I suspect it's that. And if I'm wrong, tell me. I mean, send me a tweet or put it at the bottom of the video to correct me on this, and I'll do a correction. But that's my suspicion on what Sperry is talking about. And I'll show you the tweet once more. Joe Biden is the subject of an active federal criminal investigation into his role into the counterintelligence investigation directed at Donald Trump's campaign during the 2016 election, including former vice president's activities in Ukraine. Ukrainian witnesses are cooperating. What was it called? Crossfire Hurricane, where they were looking at Trump's campaign. And Trump said they were spying on me. They were spying on me. And it was like, oh, that guy's crazy. No, they weren't. And you find out, yes, they were. Even to the point of lying to continue that spying. I mean, think of all of the lies that the FBI was telling. And even when they found out that Carter Page was a CIA asset, they still lied to spy on that campaign and continue it and keep those FISA warrants open on Trump's campaign. I guess the point that I'm making here is it should be investigated. I have no idea why anybody would be against the investigation. 3 years of a conspiracy theory, and you find out that one plank after the next goes up in smoke. Yes, the question should be asked. How did we get so enraptured into conspiracy theories and nonsense? And how could we get to the point of almost eliminating or getting rid of a president in a soft coup? So I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks, everyone.